Thank you so much for having me. We did a lot of things. I've gotten OE, gotten Quay. People think that the O is a Q. We get confused with the sunglass brand a lot, and just some people are just like, you know what, I didn't even want to try. So I'm Zoe, obviously. I am a creative project manager, and it's interesting because I always like to say that I am a perfect blend of my parents. My mom was a photo producer and art director and makeup artist on sets, and my dad works in the aerospace industry in communication. So I'm kind of like the good blend of the two, which I think makes my dad really happy because he got stuck with three girls. So I was at least one of them followed the corporate career path. At Way, as a creative project manager, I'm in charge of all of the incoming creative requests, and really getting things from like an ideation to like in the store. So if you go into like Sephora and you see our tower, like I'm like, I remember the initial conversation that's like Sephora's like, we're going to update the tower. Here's a new launch we have coming in, literally down to like what assortment we're putting on the shelves, the schematics of it, all of the emails that go out, anything on social, like any little thing that you see photos in it, any sort of creative, I've touched. It's so funny. We are a small but mighty team. I have three designers. You gotta get that bang for your buck. I will say the best thing about working for the brand is it is truly a good product. I really, it's not like I'm sipping the Kool Aid. I had never heard of the brand actually before. I knew that Jen had done a hairline and I knew of her, but I did not know anything about the product. And so when I started, they sent me a box of like one of everything. And I remember the first time I tried it, I was like, okay, wow, this is really good. Like, I actually really feel a difference. Yes. It's so interesting because I really believe in divine timing and that everything happens for a reason. Ever since I was little, I loved fashion. I grew up on photo sets with my mom all the time. So I really wanted to be involved in fashion somehow. And I used to think that I really, really wanted to do wedding gown designing. So I went to school for fashion design originally. And unfortunately, my grandma had a stroke. So I came back home and my mom was represented by Ford. So I had I guess you could call it a little bit of a Nepo baby moment. And I was able to secure an internship with them in the Milwaukee office, which at the time you would have been surprised at how much work was in the Chicago and Milwaukee area with sort of the standard ecom catalog work. So I basically was like an assistant booker and helped with all the bookings, and we would help them do scouting during the summer and just kind of learning the ins and outs of the booking process and what clients are looking for, pricing, negotiating rates, etc. And when the internship was over, I didn't want to be a booker, but I we represented artists at the time, and I was like, how can I get into this? And I think that starts with the number one thing that I believe in is like, don't be afraid to ask, because the answer is always no unless you ask. So I asked about it, and I'll never forget the other intern that I was with was like, I'm not going to ask them. Like, I don't, there's no room for us here. And I was like, well, you never know. And she's like, well, can you steam clothes? And, like, do you think you could assist comfortably on set? And I was like, yeah, I have a design background. So I know how to fit clothes to a body. I know how to use a steamer. And it's so funny because the clothes on set that come for the models are so big. Sometimes they would send me like an 8 and the model's a 4. So you really have to do a lot of magic of pinning on set. Yeah. So that's where yeah. Yeah. I just have always been like kind of a ballsy kid. And I don't know where that comes from, but actually I think I know where it comes from is that my parents are my biggest cheerleader. Like very rarely do they tell me that I can't do something. And I always joke that if I told my mom that I could fly, she'd be like, you can fly. You are the best flyer out there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I always feel like you can learn to, if it's a no, learn from the no. Okay, why not now? Or what else could I do to get there where I would be like, in a position to be hired? Yeah. So I transitioned that internship into assisting in styling commercially on set for a few years. I moved to Chicago. And then I kind of was at a fork in the road. I tend to hit these a lot in life where I can kind of keep going the same way. It was kind of that time where it's like I needed to invest in my portfolio in order to get a better rate, get better bookings, and or I could go back to school. And I did always want to go to college. And I was trying to really think about what my career path was going to be and what I wanted to do. And I still knew that I kind of liked this creative marketing side of things. So I decided to go back to school. I moved back to Wisconsin, and I went to University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, and I studied journalism, advertising, and media studies. So I went to school, and then I hit my next internship, which was I did marketing for a local restaurant group, and I think that this was a big aha moment for me because I asked him what his degree was in, and he was like, "Oh, my degree is in architecture," but he was the director of marketing for this restaurant group. And I was like, yeah, I'm like, how did you spend all this money on this degree and you're not even using it? He's kind of like, oh, I kind of started, but it wasn't all what I thought it would be. And I just remember thinking, I was like, I don't want to look up and not be doing what I went to school for. And I also knew that I didn't want to stay in Milwaukee. Both of my parents are from New York, so I've always been a big city girl. And I was like, I've got to get out. And I kind of hit that slump that postgrads can hit. I was applying for jobs nonstop. And it just can sometimes be so hard to get your foot in the door. And this is where I tell people it can be hard, especially if you are not an outgoing person. I'm a pretty charismatic person. I'm pretty confident in talking with strangers, but it is a lot of who you know and getting a connection somewhere. So I took a year of just applying for jobs religiously. I mean, I was applying for like 10 jobs a day. Like I would wake up, apply for 10 jobs, and then I would go to my serving job in Atlanta. And I lucked out because my mom lived there. So she's like, maybe you should try moving down here. And so in Atlanta, there's so much film happening. I was like, well, maybe I can like somehow get in on the creative department on a show or a movie, like meet somebody, because I also knew I wanted to move to LA. That was definitely a place I had visited before, and I was just like, this feels like home to me. I really want to move there. And I tell you, every single table, I don't care who they were. I had no clue who they were either. So I was like, making myself be known, what my interests were, that this wasn't my full time, job, that I was a recent grad and I was looking. And I made several connections, but nothing fully turned out to be what I wanted it to be. And I was coming up on that 1 year mark, and I want to say desperate, but I just feel like maybe I got crafty. I went on LinkedIn and I reached out to every single one of my connections. And I was like, I'm coming up on a year post grad. I'm really looking for something. Do you know anybody? Do you have anything? And funny enough, the guy that I did the original internship at Ford with was in LA working at OPI. And he said, I can't offer you relocation or anything, but if you want to move to LA, I have a job for you. And when I tell you, I packed up everything so quickly and booked a one-way ticket. Yeah. It's literally like that Lady Gaga quote. Like, there could be 100 people in a room, but you just need one person to believe in you. Yeah, it's hard not to take it personally because some of it is, just a generic filtered, like, you're not qualified or your resume doesn't meet our requirements. Some of it is you get a first round interview and you don't move forward. Some of it is you can get to a second or third and you don't get it. And it can be really hard to keep going and not get defeated. I think for me, I try to keep in mind, I saw this episode of Inside the Actor Studio, and it was George Clooney, and somebody had asked, how do you deal with audition rejection? And he's like, well, you didn't, if you go in and you don't get it, you're not walking away with anything less than what you walked in with. I didn't have a job to begin with. And if I apply and I don't get this, I didn't lose out on anything. I'm not in a worse position than I was before. Um, I think also I like to just believe, you know what, it wasn't meant for me because it would have happened if it was meant to happen. And I am annoying. Sometimes I can be annoyingly optimistic, but I just feel like, you know what, okay, maybe I didn't actually want that one as much as I did. And the one that is meant for me is going to come forward. Oh, it's so hard. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes though, you just have to like give yourself 15 minutes to just be really upset about it. I try not to like hang on to things. So I will like give myself 15 minutes to be like really, really upset about it. Cry, be upset, etc. And then move on because it's like being upset about it does not get me the job. It's only hindering me from finding the one that I want. Yes. I have been to LA, I think two times. Yeah, I have been there two times before. And the first time I'll never forget, I flew out of O'Hare and it was 18 degrees. And I landed in LA and it was like 83. And it was like February. And I was like, this is it. Like this is the life. We went to the beach and I was like, it's February. I have my toes in the sand and it's sunny and beautiful. And I just loved it so much. I know. Can you imagine? Like, it's cold, like 6 to 9 months out of the year. So it's interesting because while I had this work experience, I got hired as a production coordinator, and I had all this experience from being on set, but it was from a freelance standpoint. So, I had these freelance clients, they would hire me for a day rate. I really could come in for a pre-pro week. Maybe we would pack up things if we were going off site. We would kind of have a few calls with clients, and then that was kind of it. I could wash my hands of the day. And like when 5 o'clock hit, like I left and I had my life outside of work. Moving to LA and OPI, which is owned by Cody, it was very corporate. And that's an adjustment. Corporate life is very different from freelance. See, there's really a lot of politics, and there is a certain way to maneuver yourself within corporate. And while that job was challenging, like probably one of my most challenging roles and times, I think about how I learned so much and the way I'm able to communicate with outside vendors now, with my whole team. And at the time, it's really annoying the way that my boss would kind of hover over me. And I think actually in the beginning, I would send my emails to him to be reviewed before I could actually send them out. Yeah. Everything I sent to him to be reviewed before I actually sent it out to the wider team, which at the time felt like he didn't have any faith in me or that, I couldn't do the job. But in hindsight, I realized that he was actually being a very good manager because he understood that one, I was a reflection of him, and that two, I just didn't know. I didn't have that experience. And so it was up to him to teach me that. Yeah. I would say it probably took about 6 months before he was comfortable for me to do. I mean, it is, but in hindsight, I was talking to my dad last night, and he's like, it really takes you 3 years to fully learn a role and be like really well versed in it. I think in my experience, it's been pretty clear because this was truly where I was sending something and he had edits. It wasn't like I was just sending it for him to review. Later in my career, I definitely had a boss that tried to micromanage, and it was interesting because I would send things to him, which then he would use and reiterate in a meeting. And I was like, that's exactly what I told you earlier. Or kind of asking me some certain questions, so he would just kind of like mansplain back to me what I said. And I was like, but that's what I just told you. Um, so you can kind of tell, I think really what comes out of it is if there's a learning from it. If you are getting constructive feedback, if you are learning something new, or if you're getting an edit for something, I think that's like truly a learning opportunity. If it is something that's just kind of being like regurgitated back to you, or you can tell it's like you can tell when something's being done just to be done versus like there being a learning opportunity from it. Yeah. I learned that I am incredibly tough. I it was a rough role. I was away from home, like very far. Like I moved clear across the country. Most of my family's on the East Coast, so I was by myself. It was really a time to learn and use my own devices. I also was like so broke. LA is very expensive, so it was a good time for me to like get very well versed in my own finances, to utilize my own resources, to make friends and kind of build my own community, and really navigating life on my own. In a work sense, it was an opportunity to get well versed in the type of people that you will run into in your work life. And some people want to make a lot of friends at work. Some people are not that into making friends at work. And there are certain people who may not have the best intentions when they're interacting with coworkers. So I also would say that I learned too, you need to find, I always joke about this, when you are young, it's going to be tough because you're at the bottom of the totem pole and you have to pay your dues. I think it's a little bit different with this incoming generation, but I'm kind of like a younger millennial. So I was still in a time where we had unpaid internships. Like, I think most kids now are getting paid for internships. And I'm like, I was lucky if I got a reimbursement for my like commuting cost. Um, and I think that people were a lot tougher on you. So you didn't want to be super emotional. Um, I don't know if you watched The Hills, but Kelly Patron always said if you have to cry, you need to go outside. So I made sure I had like a bathroom that was like the old bathroom in the basement that like if I was having a moment, I would cry because this boss was tough on me. But it made me very resilient and really come into my own and realize what I can bring to the table. Yeah, so my time at OPI, I was there for about 2 years, but I learned so much in those 2 years because that first 6 months, he was kind of like really, my boss was really on me. And then it was just kind of like sink or swim. And then it felt like I was on my own. He had gotten a promotion and I got more responsibilities, and I had moved up to be an associate producer. And I really was taking the reins of all of the shoot planning and doing all the call sheets, the negotiating for rates, organizing and filing all of that system, making sure that I'm staying within budget and really moving around the money. So it's interesting because somebody had asked me yesterday how I fell into. I always say I fell into project management because production has a lot of the same elements as project management. You've got an ideation and you have an end goal of like where to get these things post production. And so at OPI, there was a lot of shifts just happening, which you will experience in your career. There's big shifts. We had a huge kind of shakeup with upper leadership. Our we got a new SVP. Our VP of creative ended up leaving, and we got a new woman who came from an agency, which is very different from working for one brand. And she wanted to bring her own people, which then kind of put me out because I wanted to be up for a promotion, and I did bite the bullet and I talked to her, and I really presented myself for this role, but she flat out just told me like, I have somebody else that I want to bring in from where I was before. And so it kind of was like with a new person coming in, there was no room for me to grow. So I made the decision to leave because I wanted to grow. Yeah, I think a big like a giveaway is what you said. Like, where's the person that was in this role before? Um, for me, that was my boss. He actually left and went to another company, so I was next in line to take his position. And it's kind of one of those things too. When you think about like how long you've been at a company, I think that timeline is shortening a little bit as like technology evolves. So most people say like kind of between year 2 and 3 is when you should be up for a promotion, or kind of definitely by the end of year 3. If you're at the end of year 3 and you have not gotten a promotion, like it's time for you to move on, because in my personal opinion, the company doesn't have faith in you to move on. They would have moved you on or had that conversation. Um, and so for me too, with a new person coming in, this person's coming into this role, they have to go somewhere. So if you're looking at the chain of command, everybody is in their 1 to 2 year mark. So they're not moving anywhere anytime soon. And if I'm at year 2, that would mean I have to wait till 4 years to be at this company to move up. So you have to like really think about the other positions around you. Yeah. Yeah. You have to. I think that's kind of what put me in in my next role with Nick. So it's like, you know, you need to have a clear path laid out too, and don't be afraid to ask, like, when you're in the interview process, you obviously want to ask what that looks like, but also, when you're having your reviews, making sure that you're on track in their eyes, so that you're up for a promotion. If you're not, get some clear pinpoints as to like what you need to hit in order to get there. Okay, so I this was more of like kind of like a lateral move for me if we're looking at title wise, which sometimes isn't a bad thing because I did end up getting an increase in pay. Um, and I kind of was hesitant about taking the role, but the recruiter, and recruiters are really big in the LA market, especially with these larger companies. A lot of them use big recruiting agencies, which is something I wish I had known more of when I was initially applying for jobs, because they can get your resume in front of people sooner. They also will help you like put keywords into your resume, which will help you kind of sift through that sorter more so that they'll pull you to the top. Um, and this is so LA of me to say, but I feel like what makes me a good project manager is I'm a Virgo. So I'm naturally organized and I'm very logical. Yeah, very logical. I joke like my closet is color coordinated. So, and I also am a big on communication. A key point of this role is communication. At Nick's, their main problem at the time was that there was a big gap in communication between marketing and creative. It was almost kind of like they were afraid of each other. So I worked really hard to bridge that gap in communication, which I think comes to being charismatic. And, you don't have to make friends with everybody, but you want to be cordial with everybody. And you get more flies with honey than vinegar. So, you kind of want to butter people up, because if you're running behind on a deadline, they're much more open to hearing that and willing to work on their side with the outside partner. Or, if they come to you with something last minute, this is on the flip side with like marketing. It's like, oh, we have a good rapport. We've got mutual respect for each other. You need this last minute. I can make it happen. I think it has a lot to do with empathy and self awareness. I really try to look at a situation holistically so I can see all sides, not just my side, and always leaving emotion at the door and not taking anybody's tone or what they have to say personally. And I think really like being transparent. It's interesting. I served tables in college, and I never thought that I would take those skill set with me elsewhere. But when I first started surfing, a person's piece of advice was to always be transparent. People are much more receptive if they have a good sense of what's going on and why they're having this issue. If the food is behind, let them know the kitchen is backed up right now. So I'm really sorry, but your order's taking a little bit longer. People are a lot more receptive to that than if you just ignore them and pretend like everything's okay, because they're like, if everything is okay, why am I not getting my food? So that same thing applies to project management. If a designer is running behind, I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, I have to deprioritize this thing. I know it is due at this day. I know you might have put it in sooner than this other person, but from a brand perspective, this last minute request I got has higher priority. So, just being honest with them and being transparent versus just not doing it. It's like, hey, where's my thing at? And it's, so that communication, being transparent, and also just being nice with the delivery. Everybody likes a nice person. Yeah. Honesty is key. I think to, especially since I am on the brand side of things, we're all working for the same brand. So like, this is all for the greater good of everybody. So just being honest about like whatever we're doing is in the end of the day all helping us. This is keeping the lights on. This is getting us benefits. This is getting us raises and promotions, etc. Yeah. So this is kind of like my big pivotal moment in my career. I was at Nix. I think it's important too to note that when I was doing these, and this is pretty common in the beauty industry at least, and I think fashion too, that people are hired on contracts a lot. You're not a full time employee. So I was on contracts with both of these. It's at will employment, so I was free to leave whenever. They could also let me go whenever. Um, and I was at a point where I really wanted to get in with a company where I could feel like I could get in and grow, because also when you're a contractor, you can't really kind of grow. You're hired as this position, and that's the position you're here to fill. So there were certain people at that company, like designers, who were hired as a graphic designer, and they're holding that title of graphic designer for 4 or 5 years because they're comfortable with their day rate and they're just happy to kind of be doing that steady work. But I really wanted to grow. I wanted to make sure I was like growing within my career. I also wanted to make more money, and I wanted that security of being a full time employee. So kind of a weird time because this happened in 2020, like late 2019. I had my end of the year review with my bosses. At the time, I had a review with two bosses because I switched midway through, so they both wanted to review me. Um, the review went much better than I thought because me and this boss, he was a micromanager, and we kind of butt heads a little bit. But he's like, I know we butt heads a little bit, but I really appreciate you and recognize the work that you do. And I know that, when we do butt heads, it's because you're trying to keep me in check with the budget or keep us on time or, just make sure we're moving the ship forward. And so I got the confirmation that, like, okay, I am really good at what I do and I'm fulfilling the needs and goals of this position really well. And I had gone to my boss about getting, what was this looking for me? Like, were they going to hire me on? Because a lot of the time, too, they want you to start the contract. They're like, this is temp to hire, and that temp can be a long time. And they're kind of like, like, we're kind of talking about it. We got to work some things out. And I was just kind of getting frustrated. And I thought, I really I want to move up. And so I looked for another job, and I actually found another job, and I had technically quit. I gave my 2 weeks notice, and then COVID was kind of happening. And I had, so I got hired with a startup in downtown LA, and I had a really great interview with the CEO. And he really talked about how you had an open door policy. He believed in transparency and this open line of communication. And I will never forget this day because I go home to my roommate. I'm talking about, I was telling her I was getting nervous. And her friend is supposed to be coming over for dinner. And she comes bursting through the door. She goes, "You guys, I think my company is about to go belly up with this COVID. Like, it's really messing everything up." And I got nervous, and we both were like, "I have to talk to him." And I sent him an email. I said, "Can we just talk quickly?" And we got on the phone, and I said, full transparency, like, are you still comfortable bringing me on financially? Because it looks like we're about to hit a really crazy time in the economy and in the job market. And thankfully, because of the way my job works, I was like, I think I can keep my job. They don't want me to leave, but I would like to leave. And he's like, "You know what? If you can keep your job, please keep your job. I would love to revisit this kind of when everything settles down." And I was like, "Thank you so much for being honest with me." And I scrambled. I remember, this is why I say be nice to everybody, because you never know when you're going to need a favor. I reached out to all the people in marketing, and I was like, I'm going to keep asking for my job back. So they also wanted this role to evolve a little bit more and take on some more things. So I, this was probably the last day that we were in the office. I actually had to go in to get something fixed for my VPN, and the SVP was there. And she's like, I'm in the office. Like, do you want to talk now? And I went into her office and asked for my job back. She was like, no. She was newer too, which was great because I was like, we have new leadership. I'm really excited. I might have fibbed a little bit because I wanted my job back. But I was excited. We had fresh eyes on how we were going to do things. And she's like, "You know what? I've heard really great things about you. I want to take this to my larger team, and I will give you a call back later this evening." And I was like, "Okay, that's all I can ask for." And she called me back that evening, and we chatted, and she's like, "You know what? It was unanimous. Everybody is really happy with the work that you're doing. They love working with you, so we're happy to keep you on." Yeah. But this is also why you never want to burn bridges on your way out. Leave with grace and ease. Unless something really, really bad happened, there's no need to be mean in an exit interview or, burn bridges because, I was leaving on good terms. I just was like, they knew I wanted to be hired on full time. So, like, we totally understand that. That's a natural progression. There's no bad blood. And so all was good. Yeah. I thank my lucky stars for that one because I could have been unemployed through the pandemic, and I was lucky to be gainfully employed. And Nix was in a really lucky position because when all of the retailers closed, all of those high end beauty product users were going to Target and to CVS's now to get a lower end cosmetic that was open because the only thing that was open at the time was Target, Walmart, CVS, all of the Ulta, Sephora's, they were closed. So that did really well for the brand as well. what happened next is I just really I started to hit the burnout because I was like, you know what? I am working really hard and I am underpaid, overworked, underappreciated, and I want and need more. And also it was a hard time. This is in the middle of the pandemic. This is 2020, and there was a hiring freeze at L'Oreal. They were not hiring anybody new. They were not. They had ended the internship program for that year. Like they weren't even taking on interns. Nobody was getting promotions. I don't think they did bonuses that year either. But as we were kind of coming towards the end of it, they were kind of starting to thaw up on those freezes. I really just wanted to make sure that like my needs and what I wanted was known. So I also did some like market research just to like make sure that I had my talking points and I really had facts to stand on as to like what I wanted and why. And the biggest thing was I wanted more money and I wanted to be hired on full time. And I was like, if I can't get hired on full time, I'd like to at least increase my rate. Um, and I was all excited. I remember I put on a turtleneck and like red lipstick. I was like, this is my confidence outfit. I'm having this conversation. And I had a very transparent conversation with her about what I wanted, what I needed. She was a woman and she was like, I think woman to woman, I'm really proud of you for having this conversation with me and bringing this to me. I can't guarantee anything, but I will go and talk to HR and see what we can do. And it didn't work out. She came back and told me that she couldn't do more. I feel like she made the mistake of telling me that I was paid pretty well for the average. And I was like, I actually did my research. I'm really not. I'm underpaid. So that really just lit a fire under my butt. And I was like, I have to find something else. And this is when I feel like I really preach being intentional. And I love to write things down. And I wrote down an entire list of everything that I wanted in a job. And I was like, this is what I want. I also knew I really wanted to get a dog. So I was like, I want a job that I work from home or that I can bring my dog to the office. I wanted a job that paid me well. I wanted good benefits because it was like I had benefits, but I didn't have the best health insurance. I was really looking at these things that I wanted. I was getting towards the end of my 20s. So I was like, I want to make sure I have a good 401k match. And I want to, see what does their maternity leave look like for like down the line? Do they, enforce like education? Is there sort of any fitness benefits, things like that? So I got super prescriptive. I wrote this all out. And I also at the time thought I wanted to leave beauty. So I started looking outside of beauty. And then a recruiter came knocking in my inbox. Actually, I will say before that, um, this goes to, I say, kind of like take all the opportunities you can. A former recruiter I had worked with said he had a month off. He's like, if you're in my network on LinkedIn, reach out. I'm setting up time to, go over a resume. Maybe we need to freshen it up, do some word changes. And I was like, you know what? This is a free service for sure. I'm going to sign up and take this. And it is crazy. We just made a few tweaks to my resume. We talked about what I wanted. He also gave me some pinpoints on, negotiating and what to say in the interviews. And he's like, if you want this number, that is the number that you want and stick with it. Don't waver from it. Especially because he's like, people can detect when you're not confident in what you're asking for. And I tell you, we changed my resume and the messages just came flooding in. It blew my mind. Like, we changed the wording of some of my previous work experience. I added in more budget numbers for project management. The biggest thing is at Nix, I really had numbers as to like how larger projects I was managing. Like my last project before I left there was an $18 million overhaul, which is like a really big number for people. It also was a huge overhaul of like all of the look and feel of the brand in the store. So just adding those little tidbits and kind of, I changed the verbiage on kind of my freelance work so it like made a more clear path like into project management. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It. it was really blew my mind. And I think too, like, we do our best to kind of talk ourselves up, but we are also our own worst critics. So I think it's really powerful to have an outside source look at your resume and help you with that. Also, sometimes a weird trick I like to do is I talk in third person, like on my resume. I'll kind of write it out that way as if I was like somebody's talking about me, and I tend to be nicer and kind of pump myself up more. Yeah, so there's a recruiter, and she's like, there's this beauty brand, and I was kind of like, oh, I'm not really looking to stay in beauty, but I will say that the benefit package really caught my eye. She was talking about the benefits that the company offered, and I was like, wow, this is really everything that I wrote down on that list. And I'm like, okay, you know what? It was also a smaller company at the time, and I was like, I really wanted to move into a smaller company. I really wanted to feel like I was really putting, like, my work was really making change and really helping to move the brand forward. And I was like, okay, you know what? I will take the initial call. Then she tells me it's way, and I was kind of like, okay. I do some digging, and I'm like, oh, okay, people really like this brand. Um, it's got good reviews. I also kind of poked around at people on LinkedIn, and one thing that really stuck out to me was that most, I would say probably like 80% of the employees that were on LinkedIn had been there for a long time. And that always speaks volumes, because when there's low turnover, that means that the employees are happy and that they like being there. And then to me, it also shows that the company is helping to evolve them within their career. So I kept going. And then I got to that first interview. And my first interview was with our current chief brand officer, Hannah Bales. And I was like, I need to work here. Like, the way that she spoke about this brand, I was like, this is what I want to be doing. Like, this is where I need to be. And it's funny because I kind of fell into this thinking, like, oh, I'm not sure. I don't really want to stay in beauty. I don't have any hair background. I'm not that into hair. But just speaking with her, I was like, okay, you know what? This is a place that I really want to be. They also had an incredibly long interview. I think I ended up having 5 calls total. Um, but I was like, you know what? That also speaks volumes. They really want to make sure that they're bringing in the right person into the company. Oh yeah, I mean they have your budget seat. The craziest part too is I actually got another offer midway through this interview process. Another beauty brand that was starting up came in. They were even smaller. I think I was going to be like the eighth employee, and they came in. I had a great conversation with their CEO, and I was also like really drawn to her and really wanted to work with her. And I was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I remember I was like sitting with my roommate at the time, and she's like, this is great. Like, you are in a great position. Like, how often does somebody get to have 2 great offers on the table? And I was getting really nervous because Way was taking a little bit longer, which I found out later down the line is because we really respect people's PTO, and the CEO was on PTO, and they're like, oh, we can't bother him, and he has to sign off on this, but like, we also really want you, so if you could kind of hold out. And the other company is like, we need to hear from you now. And I really had to sit on it. I actually took the other offer first, and I had to rescind it. I did. Um, that was incredibly difficult. I literally will say that I cried about it. Because I felt so guilty. But at the end of the day, this is like a kind of morbid analogy, but I always joke, if you got hit by a bus, they would just hire a new person. So like, I'm not doing any harm to anybody by leaving. So I Way came back in with their other offer, and I was like, thankfully I was working with a recruiter. So I called the recruiter and I had a conversation with him. I was like, you know what? I just think long term that way will be the better option for me. This company is still really small and I'm coming off of a burnout period with Nix. And so I just don't think that this is going to be good for me long term. And it was hard and it felt bad because I also know recruiters like get kickbacks when they hire new people. So I felt bad, like I was hurting her. And I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, nobody died and everybody will move on. Yeah. That was the most important part of it. I spoke with my dad a lot about it. My dad is not my mentor. He refuses to be my mentor. I'm always, but I go to my dad. Yeah, I go to him for a lot of work advice. And I, I really wanted him to tell me what to do. And he's like, I cannot, you are at the point of your career where you have to make this decision yourself. Like, this is really the fork in the road for you. And he's like, think about where you want to be in 5 years and what does that look like. I think too, as far as we talked about negotiating what's on the table for you, one company was offering me like equity, and that can be a really big deal, and that can be a game changer. Like, that can change lives if it vests and you get that payout from it. um but it can also not work out for you, and I know a lot of people who have worked for smaller companies that it didn't work out for them. They went belly up and they never got to see that payout. And so it really just, like, I really had to take like a moment and just like sit with my notebook and like write the pros and cons and really think about where I want to be and what does my life look like. And this is something that's really important at Way is I wanted to remove myself from work as like my main identity, especially living in LA. Everybody's like, what do you do? And beforehand it was like, well, I work at OPI, or I work at Nix, I do this. And I wanted to move away from that. And I was like, with this smaller company, I will not. I will be working there 24/7. It will be the only thing I'm worried about. And I really wanted to grow as my own person. And I was like, that will happen for me at Way. And so I rescinded the offer and I accepted the offer from Way. Thank you. Yeah, it's crazy. We don't give like I said, we don't give ourselves enough credit. And when I do talk about it, wow, I've come a long way and I've done great. I have a really impressive resume, which, it speaks for itself. And I've learned so much along the way. And I think that I've become like such an incredible woman because of it. Thank you so much for having me.